everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome to a very special edition of Paranormal Fireside Chat with the Naked Bigfoot. It's nice to have everybody on tonight. It's nice to see um, a lot of familiar faces tonight that have joined in. Um, but before we begin tonight's episode, before we begin tonight's tonight's update, I should say. Um, I've got to, of course, go through all the legal rigmarole. Um, the opinions and views expressed by the Naked Bigfoot are solely those of the Naked Bigfoot. I am neither here to persuade, dissuade, or damage anybody's fragile little mind or core value systems with with the stories that I tell and the opinions that I give. My show is for entertainment and information. I'm here to entertain you and possibly inform you of things you may or may not know, or things you've suspected but have never had anybody validate. Um, if you do not like having the belief systems challenged or opinions outside of your own, if you're not, I'm not going to say you're not open-minded, but if you're curious, I do ask that you stick around. Um, I may make a believer out of you. Also, tonight, for anyone who is sensitive to bad words being spoken, meaning curse words, especially the word and fuck, which you will hear the word fuck many times come out of my mouth. This may not be the show for you. Or if you're okay with the occasional gratuitous cuss word coming out across your this feed, please stick around. But if you have any small ones in the room that you don't wish to expose um, to bad language or to sometimes very adult imagery, then please have them leave the room or watch the show where they are not in the room, or wear headphones while you're watching my show tonight, so as not to expose their fragile little minds to me. Also, we do play a drinking game here on my show. Every time you hear me say, "That's a story for another day," or "That's a story for another time," please take a moment and take a sip of your adult beverage. If you do not drink adult beverages, please take a sip of your water, tea, juice, or whatever. If you do partake of the adult beverage by the end of tonight's show, I guarantee you will more likely be drunk off your ass. And I do not drink and drive, so be at your home while this show is going on. um, and with that, let's begin tonight's show. Again, I want to thank everybody that's joined me live. I do enjoy speaking to a live audience versus doing videos and then posting them. Um, Believe it or not, I feel like when I have a live audience um, it feels like you're with me in the room while I'm giving a story. That I'm sitting in my big black chair in the living room. In this case, I'm sitting in my big black bed in my bedroom, um, surrounded by friends, by the fireside, listening to my stories. So it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun doing these lives, and I do enjoy everybody who. I know my shows are very low tech, but hopefully I'm entertaining enough, and my stories are riveting enough to keep your attention. Focus and imagine by it. Use your imaginations. Use the force. Oh, I'm probably going to get sued by George Lucas for saying that. Okay. Let's begin tonight's show. Okay. For those who know me, who have followed me either on Twitter or here on YouTube, or you've seen me on other channels, such as Bald and Bonkers, their channel, and such as The Truth About Beer, TT, AB. I have told stories of my encounters with beings, and I'm going to call them beings, not entities, because they are physical creatures that can only be described as a Bigfoot and or a Sasquatch, depending on what you wish to call it. For those who do not know or may not remember, I live in Virginia. Specifically, I live on a incredibly large, too big, farm here in Blue Ridge, Virginia, which is nestled against, believe it or not, the Blue Ridge Mountains. A quarter of my property extends actually into the Blue Ridge Mountains. So I do own a piece. This was family property that was passed down throughout my family. Our family, and when I say family, I don't mean my immediate family. I'm not talking about my mother, my father. I'm talking about my extended family. Grandfathers, great-grandfathers, great-grandmothers, great-grandmothers, aunts, great-aunts. We have, once our people started leaving the mountains, they bought many farms and many tracts of land throughout the states around the mountains, some in Tennessee, some in Georgia, North Carolina, and here in Virginia. A good amount of my family has passed away. I don't have a lot of living relatives that are left, either living in the mountains or living out here in quote-unquote civilization. But one of the things that the tracts of land that my family has owned is that they have always been in rural areas. I mean, when I mean rural, I'm talking about they're way out of the fucking the norm. They're way out of the way. Like here at this farm here, you could go out in the backyard and shoot a gun and blow up fire and blow shit up, and there's nobody within miles that would ever hear you. You're literally here on this farm here, which is, if those who do not know, the name of my farm is. We also have a business here on the farm as well. We family business here on the farm and off the farm, off site as well. But this is the site, the home base of all of our family businesses. That my family, as I found out, when I first took over, long story short, I'll just give you a very brief synopsis leading up to today, and give you the current updates of what's going on. When we first came back and took over this property, my current wife and my kids, when they were very, very, very young, when we took over this property, we made the attempt to extend the working parts of the farm past, and you have to remember, when mountain people talk about creeks, we usually mean small rivers. So when you hear me say creek, picture a small river. I usually have to, I've had people look at me and go, this is not a fucking creek, this is a fucking river. Well, not to us mountain people. A creek is a creek. And a river is the ocean to us. we wanted to extend the working parts of our property and build another house place. The house that I'm in right now, this was the original farmhouse on the property that's well over 100 years old. Um, uh, but we wanted to build another house place up in the mountains and across the creek. Well, when we originally went back there and we rented equipment, heavy equipment, to go back here and clear the land off, um, long story short, we were we encountered something in the woods. Well, something encountered us in the woods. We'd had, uh, uh, the machinery that we had back there would be damaged. It would have rocks thrown through the windows and through the windshields. Large trees were pulled down and dragged and placed onto you know, um, on the various earth movers that were out there. Uh, and this happened over the course of several days. And what happened when nobody would be out there in the woods. Now, what ended up making us leave that part of the property and never going back to it is me and a friend of mine, we actually armed ourselves because we thought it was the locals, some of the townies that were coming onto the farm, because there was a big hubbub about us taking over the property here. The county, trust me, they wanted this property. It had been unclaimed for quite some time. They wanted to take this property and carve it up and sell off the tracks and make a mint, until I appeared and took ownership of it and paid the various taxes and everything that were still owed on it. And I took ownership of it as one of the few living relatives that were still in existence that could do it. But that's a story for another day. We went back armed because we thought the townies were back in the woods, and in a very short amount of time, we were surrounded. Um, we never saw what was in the woods at first. We never saw what was in the woods. Um, but we heard them and we caught glimpses of them. We heard trees breaking. We had rocks thrown at us. We heard grunting. We heard howling. Had plenty of rocks thrown at us. Uh, we felt that we were greatly outnumbered by whatever was in the woods. Um, so we retreated. um, at first, we didn't tell anybody what had happened out there that day, and we left. And we pretty much walked backwards, back to back out of the woods with our guns drawn, because the sounds and the limbs and the trees breaking pursued us as we left the woods, but stopped once we crossed the creek and started heading back up the trails, back up to the farmhouse. And we didn't tell anybody about it. And I thought it was, it scared the fuck out of us. Absolutely scared the fuck out of us. And we didn't want to talk to anybody about it at all. I mean, who would believe that story? And you have to remember, up to this point, I was already a priest in the Voodoo religion. I had seen crazy shit in the supernatural world up to this point. Um, I had been dealing with a great many paranormal things um, up to this point. But I never felt uh, like my life was more in danger than it had been that day when we were across the creek in the woods, when we were surrounded. Now, I'm glazing over a lot of details here because I want to work up until, currently what's going on here on the farm. I didn't tell my wife, didn't tell my kids, didn't tell anybody about it until we started having things happen here on the outside the farmhouse itself. At night, we were woken up many times by something, because we have a wraparound porch, goes all the way around the entire house. Something, and all the sleeping quarters, all the bedrooms are on the second floor. Nothing's on the first floor at all. Nothing to sleep in. It's on the first floor. Um, mm, it's really hard to talk about, especially something that, endangers your family. That's hard to talk about, period. And it brings up some really shit memories. But something was stomping on our porch, very heavy. It would stomp around the edges of our porch. Um, when we'd go downstairs to see what it was, we could smell something, smell like some animal, musky odor that permeated the door. But once we went downstairs, the whatever was stomping around the porch and going around the house, it stopped. And then the next morning we'd go out. We wouldn't find any footprints, but we would find pieces of the barn doors had been ripped off their hinges. Um, our chicken coops had been raided. Nothing been taken. It was where somebody just did some looked like wanton big acts of vandalism around the farm. We found in the barns, we found shovel handles and hoe handles and rake handles had been snapped in half and left on the ground. Um, you name it. It was random destruction in the yard. This went on for some time, and it was getting worse and worse every night, to the point to where I couldn't. My wife did not want me to leave her alone at the house at night because she would hear something out in the yard. But it would always stay right outside of the range of the lights, and occasionally you would catch a bit of eye shine when you shined your flashlight out there. Um, the it got worse and worse. Like I said, when we started finding animals on the property that were killed, that were mutilated, that were ripped apart. Found a goat where all four of the legs had been ripped off and its head been ripped off. And the thing is, the parts weren't thrown around. The parts were ripped off and then laid around the animal. The head was ripped off, legs were ripped off, and then arranged around the goat's carcass. We found chickens that were torn in half. Um, we found one of our cows had been disemboweled. We eventually moved our cats, which we would always let go outside at night. We eventually started keeping the cats indoors. The cats had never been attacked up to that point. Um, we were finding piles of stone that were stacked on the bottom step leading up to the house, up onto the porch. We were finding piles of rocks that were down on there. And these were field stones. These stones were taken from the field and they were brought there. During the day, early in the morning, we have a number of people who work on our farm, farm hands who come in, um, who help with the crops, who help with the orchards, and the feeding of the animals and everything else. That they started seeing things in the cornfields around the property. They started seeing large man-like shapes. At first, they'd be crouched down and they assumed that they were bears. But then the bear would stand up, and it wasn't a bear. One instance, when that happened, my wife finally called the police to come out there. And because one of our farm hands came up, um, and he got a hold of some of the people that were, we have a landscaping design business, so we have workers who work that business to come on the property and they'll pick up equipment and stuff big equipment that we have on the property to take. He grabbed a couple of the guys with our landscaping business and pointed them out to him, and they saw it. So there was something staring at them, a silhouette, a very large black silhouette that was standing in the field looking at them. And you have to remember, these guys are huge. These are older guys. They're huge. They're local guys that I got to know and I trust, beyond. My wife called the police. They came in and told my wife not to come outside and not to come out in the backyard. Now, this was early in the morning, when the sun, right after the sun had risen. She flipped out and she called the police. Luckily, she didn't call the state police. She called the local police. Didn't get the state police involved. She called the local police. The local police came out. And luckily, it was a couple of deputies that our family's acquainted with and that I know well. Because we used to, well, we still do stuff on the property that it's illegal. We're moonshiners, okay? Well, I come from a long line of moonshiners as well. And I have a still on the property. And some of the local PD here are aware of our activity with our still. And they look out after us, and we look out after them. Wink, wink, nudge, 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 nudge. Yeah, shit like that happens still in the South. We take care of each other. But that's a story for another day. Came out and went into the field. That field is a red clay field. If anybody who lives in the South knows about red clay fields, it's a red clay field. The only thing good for growing in a red clay, well, two things that are good for growing in a red clay field. Um, Two things grow in a red clay field. That's tobacco and that's corn. And since the tobacco market's not what it used to be, um, we still raise corn out there that we sell. Sell as feed and use as feed on the property. Um, and it's about 20 acre. The field's about 20 acres. It's one of the smaller ones. But it butts right up against the woods, near where you have to cross the creek to go back into the mountains where they live at. Long story short, the cops, the two deputies came back. I came out to the properties. I got a frantic phone call to come back home, so I came back home from the office. Um, and of course, the deputies. They had never been uneasy. They said when we walked out there, we felt that something was back there in the woods looking at them. And it's something that filled them with so much menace that was looking at them that it made them draw their guns. Um, it got them to the point where they knew they were being watched by something dangerous, and it made them draw their guns. And they retreated back to the house. They got scared. They were scared shitless out there. So we had a powwow. And they left. And I ended up having to finally tell everybody what had happened. That day we were trying to, you know, fix that property across the creek. And I finally had to tell that story to my family. I had to tell that story to our farmhands. I had to tell that story to the landscaping folks that would come to our property to work on our property as well. Because I felt it had gotten to the point where it was becoming dangerous. I had tried to communicate with them after that on many occasions, to no avail. Usually, I would always get these vague feelings of menace from them. I eventually found out when I was digging around our family history, and I spoke to my great aunt Inez about it, and she clued me in on the apple tree that is on our property that is connected, that connects our family to these things that I hate calling them Bigfoot. I hate calling them Sasquatch because it makes it too real to me to call them that. If anybody understands that, the way I'm putting that. And she told me to not cut down that tree, and it made me go back and do research. And I strongly advise everybody and I'm not going to tell the whole story right here because I'm trying to give you updates. on this to a more recent updates on our Sasquatch activity here on the property. But I do have an episode here on my channel called "The Tale of the Evil Apple Tree." It'll give you more details of that apple tree and its connection to my family. Um, so I strongly advise everybody to, if you haven't watched that episode, to please watch that episode, and everything that I say after from this point on will begin to make more sense to you. Uh, so. um, where was I? Ah, when one of the more interesting things that would happen here on the property is that we have many orchards, fruit orchards here on the property, and they would come in at night when the pears were ripe, when the apples were ripe, and the plums, and so on and so forth. And they would literally strip the fruit off the trees, and it would all be gone. All of the orchards would be stripped bare. Um, but only the sides of the orchards that would face the cornfield or face the trails that would lead back to the creek and over the creek. So I knew it was them. It wasn't some intrepid mountain climbing fruit thief that was coming on the property to steal good fruit off the property. During the course of my research and frequent encounters with these things, because we were, at one point, we could not keep a chicken on the property because, again, we would find the chicken slaughtered or a goat slaughtered. Or like I said, we had the cow that was disemboweled, and then after that, we started actually completely missing the animals. We would find little pools of blood where the animal was killed and then taken. So they were beginning to take the animals off of our property. Some people would think, hey, you live back in the Blue Ridge Mountains. You've got predators. You've got coyote. You've got... I know the way I said coyote. And I'm thinking about telling the story. Just to pause for a second. I'm thinking about telling the tale of the coyotero. And what a coyotero is. And I'm thinking about doing that story real soon about a coyotero. And every time I say coyote, I think of the coyotero. And that's a scary story with the coyotero. Because those people, those things, well, they're people. They're scary as shit. It's most things that involve Native American legends are fucking terrifying. Coyotero are incredibly terrifying. At one point, I tried to do dream walks to try to contact them on a spiritual plane. I would have my spirit guide help me with that. She would always stand between me and these huge shadow figures. And when I would do a dream walk, and they didn't speak words as much as emotions that conveyed words that would pop into my head. I would ask a million questions, but only get a feeling, whether it was anger. And there are many shades of anger. There are many shades of rage. And they pretty much made sure I experienced all of them when I tried to contact them. And I realized that was doing absolutely no good whatsoever trying to communicate with them. Okay, let's fast forward a little bit. The activity would wax and wane depending on the seasons. When we had some of our worst winters, when we'd have plenty of snow on the ground, we would have little to no activity on the farm itself. And the spring and summer were the worst, and the fall. Spring, summer, and fall were the worst times. Where they could easily come down out of the mountains and easily, destroy parts of my property. Um, Obviously, I realized early on that these things were angry and they were pissed off at me. So, doing my family research, realizing that these things had had a pact, again, I strongly recommend everybody watching The Tale of the Evil Apple Tree, because I'm going to be glossing over a lot right now to get to current activity. Because it just tells the story of the connection what my family had. And my family had established. My family and I was well fucking aware that these things lived here on this property. Um, they had made a truce with them and a pact with them. And I had, by crossing the creek into their territory and beginning to destroy the parts of their, of their territory, because we had cut down many trees. We were beginning to push out roads and form roads leading back there. I had inadvertently trespassed and broken that pact that my family had made with them. And they were pissed, incredibly pissed. It got really hostile really, really fast. And let me pause for a second, just to talk about what I've learned with my dealings with these things on the property, these Bigfoot, these Sasquatch, whatever you want to call them. They are intelligent. They are not primitive. A lot of, and I'm going to speak with quotation marks here, air quotes around this, civilizations such as ours, that are technology based, that are reason based. We look at other groups of people, other tribes of people, say some of the indigenous tribes throughout South America, because they do not have our level of quote unquote sophistication with technology and with education and having the written word, that we look at those tribes as being primitive compared to us. So when I hear people on TV or any show, or people getting, Bigfoot hunters that are being interviewed, they refer to them as being primitive. I think they're wrong. I think the Bigfoot, based on my experiences, are not primitive. I think they look at us as primitive. Why do I say that? It's because of something I believe they can do that we can't do. These critters exist in two worlds. And you'll find lots of literature and stories from different tribes and groups of people who would agree with this. They exist both in our physical world and they exist in the spiritual world. And you'll hear many stories about how people have seen Bigfoot. They would have their eyes right on it, but as soon as they blinked, it'd be gone. Or it would walk behind a tree, but they would never see it again. Because I believe to them, being able to move between the spirit world and our world, spirit dimension, I believe the spirit dimension is a quasi physical dimension similar to our own. And they're able to move naturally. It's a natural ability that they're born with, to be able to move between the worlds at will. People associate bursts of light or lighted orbs appearing at the same time as a Bigfoot sighting, because I believe it's them, when the lights that they see and the orbs that they see, or actually the effects of them moving between our dimension and the other one. It's, they see a flash of light and it's gone, because they just stepped out of our world into their own, and they do it with ease and they do it with grace. there are examples in the natural world uh, that with study people began to understand. Um, Say some of the deepest creatures that are in the ocean, some of the creatures that exist in the deepest parts of the ocean. Um, when they first started to be discovered, they kept wondering, about this bioluminescence that they created. Um, but these creatures that live deep in the ocean, they developed this ability, and became part of their nature and something they could, do. And we understood that with science. So it made sense to us. But because we are creatures that exist only in three dimensions, the three dimensions around us, and our science hasn't been able to prove the existence of other dimensions beyond the dimension that we exist in now, um, we look at it as something supernatural and something that could not happen because we haven't been able to prove it with science yet. I believe that one day we will be able to prove it with science that these things not only exist but are able to move between dimensions, and that they're a hell of a lot more sophisticated than we are when it comes to things like that. That they understand what they do, that they move between worlds. Okay. I know I got off on a little bit of a tangent there, but I felt the need to explain that for a moment. Some of the revelations that I had with both my research and my experience with them. Um, they can communicate with you if they want to. I'm not saying they can communicate with you psychically because, of course, I believe that the grunts and the howls, um, the hissing, if you have never heard um, a 12-foot tall shadowy figure in the woods hiss at you, it sounds like a. If I strongly recommend that if you've never heard a king cobra do a roar hiss, I need you to Google that and to listen to it. Because imagine that sound made by that king cobra being magnified by 10 and being much deeper and much more dangerous. But that's the best way I can describe what they do. I believe it's their way of communicating with us because they understand our language, but I don't believe that they would ever care to speak it because in their eyes we're primitive. You know, we're the monkeys, we're the primates, not them. They're a higher form of life, and in their own eyes, they look at us like we would look at them. We look at them as big, giant, stinky apes. They look at us as small, stinky apes. So it's a lot of mutual distrust and a lot of mutual animosity. Speaking of animosity, let me pause here for a second and just give my disclaimer about that. I really enjoy watching shows about Bigfoot encounters and Bigfoot adventures. Um, one of There are groups of researchers out there who believe that Bigfoot is a child of the woods. Um, they could teach us so much with their gentle and understanding ways. My response: bitch, please. If you have never lived on a farm that is constantly being visited by a tribe of these bastards that are ripping your animals apart, stomping the planks on your the wood on your porch is getting snapped and broken based on their weight as they stomp around your house. When you have trees that are pulled up out of the ground in your front and backyards, if you have entire rows of shrubs being ripped out of the ground and piled into a really neat pile right in front of your main door, that is not done by a gentle being that's here to teach you about nature and love. The motherfucker wants to pull your arms and legs off and beat you to death with them. I honestly don't believe there's such a thing as a gentle Bigfoot based on my experiences. um, but again, there's so much I can tell you. So much I can tell you. Now, current activity within the last 2 years. Some of you may or may not know, I've not been in the best of health for a while now. And I think they know it. Um, Recently, the activity has slowed down. We haven't had any animals slaughtered. We occasionally have something taken from the farm, a chicken, a guinea fowl, one of our peacocks um, were taken. Hey, Bigfoot man. Were occasionally taken. Um, the property damage has ceased. Um, well, I shouldn't say it's ceased. We've had a number of doorknobs twisted and latches and handles twisted um, off of some of the various barns where I think they went into the barns to explore. Because I think, for the big reason, is that once I found out how my family was involved with them and understanding the pact my family had with them, um, I went to the edge of right past the apple tree into their property, right on the edge, and I sat there. It may sound completely fucking crazy and stupid, but I had a talk. I talked out loud to the woods, and it felt like something was out there listening. At first, I felt nothing. I didn't have a feeling that I was being watched. But as I continued to talk, um, it felt like I had multiple pairs of eyes out there in the woods past the honeysuckle looking at me. And I told them the stories that I had heard about my family and them. I relayed all the stories. I spoke them out loud. I spoke my family's names out loud to them. And I apologized repeatedly and often for what I did. And telling them that I didn't understand, but I understand now what we did. And I told them I was not asking for forgiveness. I was only asking that we could possibly I don't want to say put up with or come to an understanding now. That yes, I didn't know any better, but I know better now. But perhaps we could coexist on the property. And I promised them that I would never cross that creek again. That no member of my family, no member of my blood was the proper term that I use, would cross that creek again and enter their territory. Um, that went on. The conversations I had with the woods went on for a couple of hours until the sun was about to set. And I got up and I wandered my ass back up to the house, which by the time I got to the house, the sun had fully set. And usually you have to remember when you live in the mountains, if you live in a mountainous rural area, and most of the things, especially in the summer and fall, you hear so many insects, and you hear owls, you hear the whir of bats as they're flying out catching mosquitoes. But when I was coming across the yard to the back door to get back in, there was absolutely no sound whatsoever around me. The only sound I heard was me breathing. There were no owls. There were no crickets. There were no the whir of bat wings. There was no sound of a fox yipping in the woods. There was no meow of a cat. It was quiet. Very, very quiet. And the wind wasn't even blowing at all. It was like nature itself was holding its breath because something very large and dangerous was passing by. And I think they followed me back to the house to see what I would do next. I never turned around. Um, I did have one of the worst case of goosebumps you could possibly imagine the entire time. I kept the panic, I swallowed my panic and kept my shit under control. When I do get frightened, I lose the feeling in my extremities and my hands and my feet, and I couldn't feel my hands and my feet. And I had to keep telling myself, keep walking, don't turn around, keep walking. Because you never want to turn around to see what the monster with the big teeth is looking at you. And they followed me back to the house. I truly believe that. And that night, we didn't have any activity on the porch at all. Nothing stomping around. No piles of stone left on the porch whatsoever. And that's when we started having, again, less animals were being slaughtered. Again, we would miss the occasional animal here and there. Um, but I think they were taking them as, they felt like they were, and I still believe they do feel that way, that they're owed these things for the trespass that I did. For I betrayed them, so they would come here and they continue um, to exact that penance from me. We have a very large stump that's of an old tree that was cut down on the property when I first took it over. That's right next to the evil apple tree. And on that stump, um, 3 times a week, I go down and place, jars of honey, fresh butter, just random food objects, berries. Uh, when we have stuff that's in season, I'll pick it and leave it there for them. And then I'll walk away. And then the next day, everything's gone, including the basket, and never see it ever again. Um, but it's me paying homage to them, um, still committing acts of contrition to them. Now, last month, let's get to something a little bit more recent. Um, Last month, like I said, we had the barns where they stopped breaking into the barns. They stopped appearing at sunrise and sunset to terrify the workers here on the property. I actually had a number of people quit the property because the shit that was happening here scared them so badly. They always felt like something was going to fucking grab them um, out of the shadows around here. They were terrified of everything around here. I saw 3 vaguely brown black figures off to the western side of the yard, leading again back to the mountains. We have a huge patch of mountain honeysuckle. It's an amazing plant. Mountain honeysuckle is. You can use it to make to flavor all types of moonshine. But that's a story for another day. Mountain honeysuckle makes everything taste good. Um, they weren't looking at me. Now, you have to remember, this is like, think of how I am now. I don't leave the house very often unless it's to go to the doctor or to go out in the yard and scare my family because they think I'm a fragile old man now that I'm going to die any second. So they're constantly worried about me. So I usually sit upstairs and think of Alfred Hitchcock in Rear Window, staring out of the windows here upstairs all the time, looking at looking out into through the fields and into the forests around us here. Oftentimes by myself in the house when I'm doing this. I think they weren't passing through. I think they've been seeing me now I don't know how many people are familiar with some of the old houses, some of the old, homesteads here in the South. And I'm not talking about antebellum mansions or some shit like that. It's just a really big farmhouse, with lots of fireplaces and chimneys. But the upstairs, here upstairs, we all have balconies that you can go out onto and sit, or some of our floor to ceiling windows that we can roll up and sit in and look outside. I might be reading too much into this. Like I said, there's no more destructive, overtly destructive activity, again, aside from animals that are occasionally taken. The orchards stopped being stripped bare. Um, the grapevines weren't being ripped out of the ground anymore and thrown around the property. We didn't have cracks in our vehicles' windshields from rocks being thrown through them. We don't have that anymore at all. But they do claim the wild spaces around, where we live at, the living area here on the farm. They continue to claim those wild spaces. Um, they continue to walk through those wild spaces. Because, again, we've reestablished the truce between us. I don't think it would take much to break that truce again, to break that pact with them again. Um, I have sat down with my son and told him, because he's going to be inheriting this property. Um, I made him swear to me. Him and his sister, my daughter, made them swear to me that they would never, ever go across that creek into the woods, um, into the land beyond the creek whatsoever. That they would leave them alone. And if they left them alone, they would leave us alone. And they would also not let their friends and their spouses, break that pact ever again. Again, I saw them in the honeysuckle passing through the woods, the wild parts of the yard, as I call them. And they paused for a moment. Couldn't see a head, couldn't see a face, but I could feel their eyes. They all turned and they looked at me sitting up here in my window, looking at them. And I felt, and I haven't been able to really, um, really understand the feeling, because that feeling, like I said, they communicate with their emotions that would translate as words. Um, but I felt like they were saying to me, "We understand." And then they were gone, and then they were gone. Those dark shapes were gone again. The really funny thing is that we haven't been able to find any footprints. Um, Again, we found places where they go that something has been laying down or crouching down in the woods around our property. We're finding that now. For those who know anything about deers and deer hunting, that deers, they can usually find, especially in, big swaths of honeysuckle or running cedar or something like that. You can find places where they go and they sleep at and they lay down. They continue to come back to these places and everything is flat around them. That we're beginning to find that around the outskirts of the property. It's like they're coming down here and sleeping around the farm now, or sitting in the woods watching on the farm now. They're waiting for something. I just don't know what it is yet. I suspect I know what they're waiting for. They are waiting they're waiting for something to happen, and then they're waiting to see what the after effects would be once that happens. And I think it's beginning. They're becoming curious. It's gone from anger and rage to curiosity. I don't feel anger and rage emanating from the woods or emanating from the darkness at night from them ever again. I feel like it's more of curiosity coming from them now. But they're not so curious as to walk up and shake my hand. I don't think that's ever going to happen. Not in my lifetime. Maybe in my son's lifetime, but definitely not in my lifetime. We still catch whiffs of them in the windows or something's in the woods. We catch whiffs of that horrendous odor, that they produce. We see things in the woods at night now that resemble foxfire. Those who don't know what foxfire is, they're lights that appear in the woods. They're very famous here in the mountains of foxfire. Lights that have been described as the spirits of dead people, the spirits of the woods, but they're little lights that pop on and off in the mountains and in the woods around the mountains. That we're starting to see more of those lights appear in the woods, blink in and blink out here in the woods. And I believe it's them. That they haven't claimed the territory around the house as their own. But again, curiosity is drawing them from the woods. But I believe they're trying to honor the pact by not desecrating our living area again, like I desecrated their living area back in the day when this first happened. Like I said, it's an uneasy truce. Now, one thing I did mention about deer, something the townies here in Blue Ridge would always talk about, and they still talk about, is the lack of deer on my property and on my mountainside. That the deers don't come anywhere near my farm. Because I believe that they would be a natural source of food to them if they got them. And I believe it's because the deer don't come there that they have access to our livestock here on the farm. And they take, just enough now to satiate their appetite, to satiate their hunger. But the deer are smart. They're not going to be handed over as a happy meal to a bunch of pissed off Bigfoot out here. Well, guys, it looks like it's that magic hour has, come around at last. I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight and listening to this tale. If you like what you saw, please hit the like button or the dislike button. Leave comments if you wish to. Constructive criticism is accepted. I am not easily offended. You can find me on Twitter at VoodooMan3, or you can Google it. Google Mike the Naked Bigfoot, and you'll find all the social media that I'm connected with. If you wish to, I do follow back. If you follow me, I will follow you back. You can DM me with questions. I do no longer accept dick pics, so no dick pics. But that's a story for another day. Have a fantastic night. I look forward to having everybody here again for our next paranormal fireside chat with the Naked Bigfoot. Have a great night and be safe.